Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we have the next elite spec build to talk about that I've been running, and this is the Ranger Elite specialization, the Untamed. Thank you all so much for coming. I will see you later. It's going I do have a build for the Untamed. The Untamed is a little weird at the moment. It's not really fulfilling something. I think it's really missing that idea, that niche that slots it into particularly group play. Now, let the record show that I think the Untamed is actually really great at dealing break bar damage, defiance bar damage, for phasing or for interrupting enemies and adds. And I think that it's a pretty valuable skill. Granted, there are some abilities on other elite specs that have higher defiance bar damage, but this has very consistent, frequent DPS and defiance bar damage. So if they ever want to make Untamed more of a tank bruiser and create endgame content that forces or pushes people into the route of a tank, you know, I think the Untamed would be absolutely perfect for this role. Slap some taunt on it and, you know, it could be a really interesting elite spec. But as of right now, it really is missing that group function, other than the defiance bar damage, but people are not really getting for that. So let's talk about the gear, and then we'll talk about the traits and talk about some gameplay. For my Untamed build, I am currently running with Commander's gear. This is power, precision, toughness, and concentration. The power precision is great for just flat damage, the toughness is there for survivability, and the concentration is also there to add some boon duration. I'm taking the superior rune of the Ogre. This is power and ferocity, and I also gain increased strike damage dealt by 4%, but interestingly and fun, for the aspect of fun, I can summon a rock dog while in combat on a 60-second cooldown. So when I enter combat, I will have a little bit of a companion to help me out. Considering I wanted the Untamed to be the elite spec that allows you to have 2 pets out, this is a nice middle ground. As for the weapons, I'm taking hammer and also longbow. For hammer, I'm running with superior sigil of accuracy, plus 7% critical chance, but also I'm running with superior sigil of celerity, gain quickness for 5 seconds when disabling a foe. And with hammer, you have a lot of disable, also on your utility skills, so you're getting decent amounts of quickness. Longbow, I'm taking superior sigil of peril to increase my vulnerability duration, just because I was a cheap sigil, but there's also decent vulnerability application on the longbow. And then finally, superior sigil of accuracy for this weapon. As for my accessories, I am running with the dragon stat. Gotta get used out of the new stat combos. We have power, precision, vitality, and ferocity. As for my build, I am running with beast mastery, marksmanship, and untamed. Beast mastery, I've decided to run with potent ally, gaining might on crits. Wilting strike, beast abilities inflict weakness on those struck. You could maybe take natural healing if your pet is a little bit in danger, but it doesn't really apply to you, so I would mostly rely on Wilting Strike. And then for the Grandmaster, Beastly Warden. Beast abilities taunt nearby foes. This is also good for break bar damage. If only taunt was a system that actually was used to manage boss aggro, that would be great and be interesting and maybe provide the Untamed a niche. And then for marksmanship, I'm taking Hunter's Gaze, Far-Sighted, and Lead the Wind. You could take Moment of Clarity, gain an attack opportunity for you and your pet on interrupting a foe. Daze and stun durations that you inflict last longer. I almost want to just take this. Am I going to change? You know, we're going to adapt on the fly. I'm going to take Moment of Clarity. And then I should probably take Predator's Onslaught if I'm really thinking about it. You and your pet deal increased strike damage to disabled or movement impaired foes. I probably should take that. Lead the Wind is nice, but it's very focused on longbow, and I'll just let longbow be what it is. And then as for the Untamed, I am taking Nature's Shield. Cantrips grant barrier to you and your pet. This will allow you to be a much more survivable entity on the battlefield. Once again, as a tank, as more of a bruiser, this is a great trait. I would love if there was taunt somewhere on the kit for the Untamed. If you don't necessarily need barrier You can take debilitating blows for extra conditions with vulnerability and weakness, or you could take blinding outburst. Probably this, because it's more damage. Taking enhancing impact. Disabling a foe grants you boons based on your current state. This is quickness, and on top of my sigil, I'm getting even more quickness out of it if I'm in the proper untamed state. Finally, I'm taking Ferocious Symbiosis for that damage, though I want to point out Fervent Force is really fun in PvE just to reduce those cooldowns. But Ferocious Symbiosis, you and your pet grant each other increased damage and movement speed when striking enemies. As for my utilities, I'm taking Perilous Gift. While active, you cannot die. When the cantrip ends, heal based on a percentage of your missing health. This is really good. I was very worried that it wouldn't be that useful of a healing skill, but I've been in many situations where I've got down to literally 1% or 1 health, not even percent, like 1. You're able to survive for about a second, 2 seconds, depending on when you cast this. And then you gain a really strong heal because it heals for 50% of your missing health. So you go from literally 1 health back up to 50%. Next, Unnatural Traversal. This is good to get to targets, even in PvE settings. I like this very much. Next, Protect Me for extra barrier and a stun break. Exploding Spores for extra damage, but also the knockdown is really nice. Does decent Defiance bar break, and it's pretty good. Does some poison damage, which you're not really getting too much out of, but any damage is good. Finally, for my elite skill, I'm taking Forest Fortification. This is such a fun elite skill for that tank playstyle. However, there's not much to capitalize on it, because if you're in a group setting and no one's like damaging you, or you're not taking aggro, you probably take something else. But if this skill also had it to where, Ayumi, I am speaking. But if you had this to where like you also applied taunt in PvE, or maybe something along the lines of Savage Shockwave does some taunt on its first hit, there could be something more to Untamed. I think that's what I'm really getting at. There could be something more in terms of the role you play. Nevertheless, Forest Fortification reduces your damage by 50%, and also your strikes will reduce the cooldown of this ability. And if you strike multiple targets, so if you hit 5 enemies with 1 attack, it chunks the cooldown by 5. So you'll go from 90 to 85 to 80 to 75, and if you can keep that up, I have gotten Forest Fortification to refresh its cooldown before the 10 seconds of this buff is up. Let's get into some gameplay. And it seems like people are fighting this champion. So let's show off some of that crowd control aspect of this build. We're gonna pop this, of course. We're gonna actually change stances to get some more damage off to reduce the cooldown of Forest Fortification. Being in melee, you do have to be a little more careful with what you stand in, of course, because there is a field there. We're gonna go back into longbow, and that's what I like taking. That's why I enjoy taking a melee weapon and also a ranged weapon for these situations where you might need it. Let's swap back over to get a little bit more damage out. We're actually gonna pop our heal, and the cool thing about the heal is that I don't believe that it is based off of the barrier that you have. I think it is purely health, so you can feel free to stack as much barrier as you want and still get a decent heal out of it. Let's do Savage Shockwave, get a little bit more crowd control going. Let's do this, and we'll go back into our personal Untamed phase, Unleashed for ourselves to get extra damage out. And yeah, that was pretty good. Pretty easy. I think we just did some decent damage, some decent CC for these instances. Of course, it's nice to get some loot as well. But let's show this off in a little bit more of a, centered solo area. Also, a lovely rock dog, just so great. I wonder, for this build, I like to stay in Untamed or Unleashed Pet so that I can get my damage reduction of 25%. They recently buffed the buffs that Untamed gets with your F5 in the sense that you will take 25% less damage if your pet is unleashed, but you also will gain 25% increased damage if you yourself are unleashed. So it's a little bit more of an enticing trade-off. Do I want to have that damage reduction, or do I want to give myself that damage increase? As for the pet, when they are unleashed, you have your F skills, you have Venomous Outburst, which is really nice to have to get your pet to your target very quickly. You have your F2 to do some slow extra damage in an area. The one thing I would like to say about your F2 is I would like and appreciate if this still counted as a beast ability. They would be even more strong if instead of Wilting Strike and even like Go for the Eyes, if Go for the Eyes, Wilting Strike, and Beastly Warden weren't just beast abilities, but rather F2 skills, as is on other profession mechanics, they would be so much more widely applicable to the Untamed. So we're going to be playing a little bit in Unleashed Pet, just because you have so much crowd control options for unleashing your pet when you're in this version of the hammer. It's a lot of fun. We're going to pop in over here, gain a little bit more vulnerability on foes. And this is a nice place. What I will say about the Untamed is that it is missing that sense of further identity. The groundwork is laid out, the blueprint for this elite spec is here, but I think it's a little bit of a disappointment that your abilities don't change based off of the archetype of your pet. So for this one, it's a ferocious. All these F abilities are the same. If I swap to my Phoenix, which is the other weapon, other pet that I'm using, there isn't a change there either with any of the F abilities. Now, I don't think that every single F ability needs to change based off of the ferocious to stout to supportive archetypes. Would that be amazing? Sure. But I'm willing to give it some grace. I think a nice middle ground to this would be if the F3 of each of your abilities change, or each of your pet abilities change, depending on the archetype that they are. So for a stout pet, I could see them getting Enveloping Haze, where they have that bubble. It's a bit more defensive. It utilizes chill. It takes advantage of that disable. In terms of a ferocious pet, you could have an F3 that does stronger strike damage. If you have a pet that does, what do we have here? A more versatile, maybe they do some damage and also some condition damage. And then if you have more of a supportive pet, which is a pig, maybe the F3 applies some boons to yourself and allies. Maybe it applies a little bit of alacrity or like protection and resolution to allies, something to play more with that group aspect. And I think that is what is truly missing here. Other than that, I'm really having a decent time with Untamed. Well, I never really take Untamed into strike missions or raids because it doesn't have that group aspect. And because I also think that this is an extension of the boon system change with 5 targets, if an elite spec does not have something applicable to the group, I don't think people are really gunning for it. I don't think people are usually going to be picking it up unless it does astronomical amounts of damage. Because of the boon change, you want to have an elite spec that can play into that group feel. And that is kind of a drawback of the 5 boon system. I know some people are in support of it, and some people are not. I think that they went a little too hard in the 5 boon department because it has really restricted group diversity. And I know people might say, but the metrics are showing that people are playing more varieties of elite specs. But I don't think that falls on the onus of the 5-player change. I think it's a natural occurrence when you have 9 new elite specs, and they also apply those boons. It's a disappointing factor when you have to consider that not every elite spec applies those boons that, you know, the public is really searching for. So it's not to this, the reason people are playing more diverse classes is not because of the boon change. It's just because those classes can apply those boons now, those balloons. And Untamed just does not fit into any of those categories. I think if there were more endgame content bosses that needed a tank, I think the Untamed would be absolutely fun to play. But you'd also have to incentivize someone playing a tank. And I think a nice way to do that would be to have a boss where, depending on who is their aggro and who is taunting them, they in turn will take 20% increased break bar damage from that tank player, and everyone else, their break bar damage, they don't receive like as much break bar damage, like 5% reduction or something like that. I think tanking and being that manager of the boss encounters could fit in Guild Wars 2. It just doesn't feel like they've really tried it out all that much. But for the sake of this Untamed, let's show off how you can get this elite skill to be absolutely off cooldown so very quickly. And it is so much fun. We're already going from like 20, and also look at that. Already back to using my elite. So this elite does shine in group settings, where you can use this off cooldown for the most part when you are striking many targets at a time. I highly recommend this elite skill if you are playing solo and maybe you are dying a little bit more often, or you find yourself that you're going a bit lower and you want to maybe negate as much of that as possible. I think taking Nature's Shield with the cantrip is amazing, as well as Fortis Fortification. And this was my Untamed build. Thank you all so much for coming on by. I would love to hear your thoughts about the Untamed. I know a lot of people have very harsh critiques about the Untamed, but I don't want to just hear harsh critiques like you don't like it. I want to hear what people recommend or would suggest for changes and or additions. Thank you all for coming. Like the video if you liked it, comment down below your thoughts, of course, and subscribe for more Guild Wars 2 videos. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a Patreon where you get early access to these videos and can recommend them and get an exclusive Discord channel. And if you'd like to order Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons, I have links below, and they greatly help out the channel. Thank you so much, RenaNet. If you're interested in VPN services, ExpressVPN is located in the description. And by using that, it also helps out the channel. Thank you all so much for coming on by, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody. Mwah.